the costs are coming down and the experiences are getting better. And so eventually it will cross over and hit the kind of experience most people want.
In 1992, I was 9 years old, and I saw a commercial for a movie called The Lawnmower Man. At the time, all this trailer did was terrify me and further convince me I had no use for horror movies. But what the film was doing for adults, some of them anyway, was introducing a new concept. The Lawnmower Man opens with a title card reading, "By the turn of the millennium, a technology known as virtual reality," all caps, "will be in widespread use. It will allow you to enter computer-generated artificial worlds as unlimited as the imagination itself." Its creators foresee millions of positive uses, while others fear it as a new form of mind control. Well, unfortunately for the people of 1992, the widespread adoption of virtual reality would actually take a couple decades more to come about. And fortunately, as of yet, it hasn't brought any mind control along with it. But computer-generated worlds, limited only by your imagination? Yeah, VR has absolutely delivered on that part of the promise. And now that it has, it's already becoming common enough that many folks have stopped asking how we got here and where VR is going next. So for the final episode of the season, let's ask those questions. This is Living in the Future, a podcast powered by MediaTek that tells the story of technology that's evolved beyond the TV screen, transformed from fantastical cinematic science fiction to actual products that change the way we live and work. I'm your host, Michael Fisher, and this is episode 10, Virtual Insanity. No, actually, that's a Jamiroquai song. Virtual Reality. This podcast is sponsored by MediaTek, powering incredible gaming experiences from VR headsets to consoles and smartphones. MediaTek chipsets are optimized to give you the best performance while staying power efficient. They've got ray tracing support to give you more realistic visuals and lighting effects, and connectivity enhancements so you don't miss a moment of action. Thanks to MediaTek for sponsoring this podcast. Dean Takahashi, for the past 16 years, you've headed up the Games Beat section of VentureBeat, but as I understand it, you've been covering the world of gaming since at least 1996.
Yeah.
And you've written 2 books about the Xbox in the process. Congratulations on a long legacy of doing what, in high school, my friends said would be the ultimate dream job, which is writing about video games. Welcome to the future. Thanks for making the time for us today.
Yeah. I used to be told that I had a dream job because I could get paid to play games, and that was kind of true mostly. But now I feel like I don't get enough time to play games because I'm so busy with the job.
Yeah, tell me about it. It's funny how that works, isn't it? Yeah, I think my pocket response to people when they ask me what I do, and I tell them I mostly review phones, I play with phones for a living. They're like, "Wow, what's that even like?" And I say, "Well, it beats working for a living," and we have a good laugh. But it is a lot of work, isn't it? But we're talking virtual reality today, and I realized after I'd sent you kind of my thoughts for what we would talk about that I hadn't laid out a little bit of time, a minute, to talk about what virtual reality even is. And as far as I understand it, in its simplest form, and I've used a lot of these headsets, but like if you break it down, you take away all the glitz and the casings and all that stuff, we really are just talking about putting 2 tiny screens in front of people's eyeballs and hooking them up to some motion sensors. And I mean, that's the basic essence of it, right?
Yeah. Give you the sort of ability to see in a spatial way, to turn your head around and 360 degrees and see something you can interact with in every direction.
Now I love that. That's a succinct definition because it doesn't include the requirement of a wearable of any kind. It doesn't include the requirement of a headset. The only reason we do it with a headset these days is because we are not, I don't know if you're a Star Trek fan, but we're not in the era of holodecks yet, right? Take us back to the beginning. I mean, we as I laid out in the intro that people have been talking about virtual reality since the 1930s, which blew me away. But for me, I think my first hint of real life exposure to anything resembling VR was like the Nintendo Power Glove. Did you ever have one of those?
No, I never did. But
neither did I.
I had one experience with virtual reality back in, I think it was 1994, when I went with family to visit China and then to Hong Kong. And then in the big mall in Hong Kong, they had this virtual reality game that was very crude, very polygonal at the time. And it was running a game or an app called Dactyl Nightmare. And it was Jaron Lanier's company that had created like the first consumer-oriented virtual reality headset. It was like, a location-based entertainment thing where you go to the mall and you get a certain number of minutes to go do this Dactyl Nightmare experience. And it was like flying pterodactyl.
Okay, got it. So you're kind of like there's terrain beneath you, and you're inhabiting this flying dinosaur. What was did it stick with you because it was so different from previous video game experiences you'd had? Was it just so novel? I mean, did it stir anything within you? Because I remember very distinctly my first VR time.
It was interesting to be able to say, turn your head and then look and see something in a cyberspace world that really wasn't there. It did remind me of a lot of the sort of motion simulators at the time that companies like Sega had, where if you're flying a jet around, they put you in this sort of gyro like ball inside an arcade machine, and you'd be sitting in this and it'd be spinning around. So it had some sort of companion-like experiences that were not VR.
Right. Yeah, it's funny. A lot of those came up in my research when I was kind of looking at the early days of pre-VR, pre-consumer VR. And some of these enterprise applications or like industrial applications were exactly as you described, those air flight simulator things that are full motion things to train pilots, NASA's had just decades of experience in this space. In fact, it created that virtual visual entertainment display in the 1980s to train astronauts and things. You have the Data Glove by VPL Research. It's just the landscape is replete with examples of these very application specific, not even products, but devices to train highly specialized people in highly specialized fields. But we're now in an era which I think started, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but from my perception started about 10 years ago, or maybe a little less, where we're entering this consumer era of VR. We've got this low cost, kind of really low complexity devices that used your smartphone to drive the experience at first. You remember Galaxy VR or more famously Google Cardboard, right? I feel like those were the first times that I could take, actually, I just remember this, where I could take my phone that I was reviewing at the time, like a Galaxy S7, throw it into a plastic visor that sometimes came with it, and put it on my family friend's face. And run, I think a common little vignette was like you're in a shark tank underwater and the sharks are coming at you through the bars. And I just remember that. I hadn't thought about this in ages, but my family friend just reached out in surprise and alarm and knocked over a full glass of red wine on the table next to him and just ruined half the living room. And I think swore a lot. But, that was, the mid-aughts when you could really start to normal people could start to get a feel for what was possible.
Yeah. I remembered at the time, not that long after the revival of VR happened, that there was an application called The Walk. And it was about this guy who did a sort of line walk on a cable between the World Trade Center buildings in real life.
Oh, yes. He did that in the 70s. Man on Wire was the film that documented that.
And you got to experience what he did in VR. And so you'd be walking on a wire, trying to balance as you went from one building to the other. so inevitably it was funny because every time somebody stepped off the wire and fell,
Oh man.
they almost fell in real life, or they felt like falling, right? And so that sense of vertigo hits you as soon as you like step off the line.
Sure.
And it was like a line in the carpet that you're supposed to walk down, but to you it looked like you were walking on suspended wire, right? And so that was crazy.
My palms and feet are sweating just thinking about this as you describe it, because I think I did a recent demo, probably it was Vision Pro or something, where there was a very similar kind of tightrope thing, and it's so visceral. But I think it wasn't just a turning point in the mid-aughts because the stuff got cheap enough and simple enough to do at home. It was that it got good enough to prompt those kinds of responses. Like, I had put on virtual reality headsets in the past. I'd probably had some similar, some cheaper video game experiences earlier. But I remember in 2015, putting on the HTC Vive for the first time at Mobile World Congress. And the most famous demo that I think we got at that trade show was called the Blue.
Oh, yeah.
Which was essentially a dive to the bottom of the ocean. Did you try this too?
Yeah, that was a good one. Mm-hmm.
Oh my God. No, I mean, it was so profound to me that so you had a guy next to you, you had the technician giving you the demo, and he had like a laptop or whatever where he could see what you were seeing in the virtual space. So he was always on the same page as you with what you're experiencing. But I had to be reminded, because I was underwater in this virtual space, I had to be reminded that I could breathe, because I was losing the ability to keep track of that. And when this giant blue whale swims up to you, which is sort of the, the turning point of the piece, I was so overwhelmed by the scale of the creature that my knees almost buckled. And I remember the technician saying something like, if it makes you more comfortable to know, the whale is friendly. I was just absolutely overwhelmed by the experience. And I think that's the moment I started taking it more seriously. And I think that's around the time, 2015, 2016, when these things really started to develop some momentum, didn't they?
Yeah. I remember the one that really also struck me was the Oculus demo with the T-Rex, and the Tyrannosaurus Rex came after you and chased you. It was pretty realistic and pretty felt like you're in Jurassic Park.
Yeah. Which is funny because, I mean, I think one of the challenges that VR has always faced from an adoption perspective is that anyone outside the headset can't understand what you're experiencing. You just look like an idiot. Right? Like, you just look like someone kind of open, slack-jawed, experiencing a world that nobody else on the outside can relate to. But that point in 2015, 2016 with, the Oculus and the Vive, there are several podcasts from the time where a bunch of us are trying to describe the feeling to people. And we're like, no, this is worth paying attention to. It's real.
Mm-hmm. And I think the Oculus people sort of, as their promo, would talk about the Oculus face, right? And so, like, you have this mask covering your eyes and all that in VR, but the face you're making with your mouth is like, as you said, slack-jawed. Your mouth is hanging open and you're sort of staring at something in wonder and just reacting in the moment. So. Yeah,
the impressive version of the kind of unfortunate Palmer Luckey Time magazine cover photo, right?
That's right.
I have a question before we kind of move on to the more advanced versions that we have now today. I mentioned Google Cardboard and Galaxy VR. These things were simple, but they were remarkably effective for basically a plastic visor or a cardboard visor you throw your phone in and put on your face. Why do you think they didn't make it? I mean, Google is, of course, famous for canceling projects. Yeah. But why doesn't Samsung still make a Galaxy VR? Why don't you have a Motorola kicking out a low overhead, high margin accessory for phones? Why didn't that subset of VR make it?
I think that Palmer Luckey did have this way of describing the experiences that you could get with VR and how you rated them, really. And he felt like there were a lot of experiences that were kind of poisoning the well around VR, and that if you didn't shoot for the highest quality and you went with something that was very rudimentary, like Google Cardboard, then you were not truly giving people that VR experience. And not trying to transport them to make them feel like they had sort of persistence in a virtual world, that they were somewhere else than standing in their living room. That feeling. That's what he wanted to have every application create for you. Really, it's that feeling. And so when these other kinds of experiences like cardboard fell short, people wouldn't pay for them, right? They might experience it once and say, "Oh, that's great," but they're not going back to it over and over again. And I think something like that would have doomed all those efforts. That you eventually run out of people who are going to be amazed by the first couple of seconds that they're in there and wearing it. But then after that, do they ever go back to it? Or does it just gather dust until they can find one more person who hasn't tried it before and will get excited about it? I used to show things like the Samsung to my family during holiday celebrations, and they would get excited for sure. But they would never really ask me to do it again.
Yeah, there's only so many times that Google Cardboard roller coaster can capture your imagination, right?
Yeah. But I did that again during the last holiday, and it turned out that the most popular thing that everybody wanted to play was Pistol Whip. And it's just a shooting game in VR that, is very intense and makes you all sweaty. And so they stayed in it longer, and they kept doing it all day long. There was kind of like a little line among the relatives to go and get in and experience this. And so it feels like it has come away in the last 10 years, really. So the experiences you can get now, they're just more fun and interesting.
I'm glad you mentioned the fitness aspect of it, because to me, that was one of the things that I found most compelling about the Vive almost 10 years ago, was that I wasn't sitting at a desk. I wasn't tethered to a computer. Well, I was, but it was a long tether. It was the first headset that I experienced where I could get up and move around a room in physical space, in addition to, and that would be mapped onto virtual space around me. But for the Vive, at the time, you had to put up these, I think they called them lighthouses. They were essentially sensors in the corners of the room, and you had to tether it to a high-performance gaming PC. But it was so compelling that I actually did that. I devoted a whole room in my apartment to it, and I think I borrowed a PC from somebody. And because that experience was so compelling. Why do you think? I mean, first of all, what has the technology done?
I still have one of those in my room.
Do you really? You still have a lighthouse? But you don't. I mean, it's the OG one, right? You don't need them anymore, right?
Yeah.
So why? How did we move beyond the need for that kind of room scale approach, or did the demand for it simply die down?
I mean, they've been busy developing better cameras and better sensors, whether they're IR sensors or they're actual cameras. And the MediaQuest Pro, I know, had 10 different sensors like this in it that were effectively just like cameras. It would look in at your eyes and see where you were looking, and so they could actually know which direction you're looking. If you turn your headset around too, they would detect that motion.
Accelerometer type things with the gyro things.
A few cameras looking forward that look out into what's in front of you, and those cameras can sort of deliver to you a mixed reality experience, which is the experience of seeing video in front of you of what you're looking at, because you can't actually see through the mask.
Right.
Which is more like a display in front of your eyes, right? And so then the display would show the video of what is outside. And so that's the kind of experience you get with the Apple Vision Pro.
Yes.
As well. But the MediaQuest 3 also has this, MediaQuest 2 in a more limited way. Mm-hmm. But these sensors, these cameras, they just sort of load them up on there now so that they know more easily what you're doing with your arms, which is related to if you want to use, say, your hands and fingers only to control something.
As opposed to having to hold controllers in your hand.
Yeah.
You can directly manipulate the virtual space with your fingers.
Yeah, so it's detecting where your hands are, what your fingers are doing, whether you've got a fist or anything like that. The only problem with these sensors and cameras usually is that if you sort of are reaching behind your back for something. Like if you're pulling an arrow out of a quiver and trying to get a bow ready, then it's more difficult for it to detect that kind of thing. And that's the kind of case where these external sensors were more useful.
Sure. Extrapolating a little bit further on that, because I just love the notion of for some reason, I find it so compelling that you can walk around in the real world and interact with real world objects that are mapped onto virtual ones. Did you have occasion, I'm sure you did, to visit at least one of these room-sized scale VR holodecks, essentially, like The Void created, or there were a few companies that did this, I think, that created a giant arena that you could have virtual reality experiences in?
Yeah, there's still one out there called Sandbox VR.
Okay.
That has, more than 40 locations around the world. They have one in San Francisco that I've been to quite a few times, and it's location-based VR, where they have a better VR experience for you, which does include putting you in a room where there are a bunch of cameras up on the walls. And so the sensing is a lot more accurate. They have like a Squid Game experience that you can do there. And there's that one scene in Squid Game where they're walking across a bridge, right? They can choose to step left or step right. If they choose wrong, the glass breaks and they fall down to their deaths in the Netflix show.
Right.
And so then they replicate this experience in VR at the Sandbox VR.
So, okay. So I'm interested in how that illusion is accomplished, because this is probably, the last time that I was at one of these was in 2016. So it was probably a lot less advanced. And there was a Void kind of mini thing happening in Times Square. And it was a Ghostbusters game, right? So you got the headset put on you. You got a haptic vest put on that would give you these kind of impacts. If you got shot, you would actually feel it. And of course, he had a big old gun. Yeah. And you would be walked into essentially a playground, and it was virtually happening in your head, but you were actually walking around real space. And then if something like the side of the building would get torn off, there were fans rigged to blow air onto your face. It was kind of like a 4D movie theater kind of thing. Is this very similar, like to what Sandbox does?
Yeah, they don't have, they put sensors on your ankles, your knees, you wear a vest and then a headset. But you don't really have any props. You don't have anything in your hands anymore.
Okay.
I think if you were doing that and you're in this group of 6 people, like they can fit 6 people in the same experience, right?
Oh, yeah. Cool.
There's that danger of collision. And if you're holding, a big wooden gun or something like that, then you could run into somebody and do some damage.
Right.
So what they do is they give you the view of what's around you, and so like again that mixed reality of the real world plus images that are sort of inserted on top of that that make you think you're in the Squid Game. Right? You're on that bridge walking.
How does it simulate the falling?
So you just have to be careful not to run into the other players that are trying to do the same thing.
Yeah. But how, like if you fall off the bridge or the bridge breaks, like do you have the sense that you're falling? Is it all visual, or do they do it with some wind? Do they do?
Yeah, you get that same feeling as I mentioned with the walk, where you think you're falling, and then you might actually follow through and actually fall. But usually you can recover and just sort of remember, oh yeah, I'm in real life. I'm not actually falling. There was this game, Population 1, that was on the MetaQuest as well, MetaQuest 2, and I played that, and it was a battle royale kind of game where 20 players or so would square off against each other until only one of them was left in this shooting game. And you can climb up to the top of these towers. And then when I did so, I was just shooting people from above, and that was a great position. Right. But then I slipped off and I fell.
Oh God!
And then I felt nauseous when that happened. Right, and that I thought I was falling like 100 feet or so. The motion just got to me, and like I had to pause and sort of take the headset off, and then. But yeah, you don't realize that it's all in your head. Right.
Yeah. That's always a very memorable moment to me, is after having a positive VR experience, taking the headset off and having to reassociate myself with the real world. And I remember more often than not being disappointed that I'm back in the real world. I think also that's a rather clever maneuver that some of the more savvy companies do when they're doing demos, is I've been asked to, load my own memories, my own photos into I think Vision Pro, but other headsets as well, and be able to experience my memories at a giant scale that you just can't get from a computer monitor. And it's like, it really does change how you interpret and re-experience those moments by you feel like you're in them, like Minority Report.
I don't own a Vision Pro because I haven't brought myself to spend the $3,500.
I understand. Me either. No.
I think Apple's only sold about 200,000. It's probably one of their weaker product launches, but I think everybody knows that it's sort of years ahead of its time, I guess.
Yeah.
And, eventually it'll be less expensive, but yeah, it is creating interesting experiences for people who are using it,
right,
to the point where a bunch of people have been walking around outside with it on, because it does work outside pretty well with the kind of display.
This is a question I think I know the answer to, but I'd love to be wrong. Like, not just Vision Pro, PSVR, Oculus, whatever. We have these really, really compact, really powerful headsets now that you can wear on a plane, or you put on a headset and give yourself 15 desktop monitors if you want to be a real power user. And that has happened really, really quickly. This stuff wasn't around 5 or 6 years ago. Is it just a byproduct of the same thing that makes all technology interesting to cover? Is it just miniaturization and iteration on power year over year, or was there like a particular event that happened that led to this sea change of like, oh, this is kind of normal now?
I think there's always been the trade-offs in the technology. If it's battery powered, for one, you get a very different experience. You get less battery power to use there, and so you can't replicate the same kind of quality of graphics and sustain them for a long time as you can when it is hooked up into a personal computer, or a very powerful machine. So that's one of the trade-offs that happens. Apple, different sort of augmented reality experiences would have a set of glasses that were fairly small and lightweight, and they would have a cord running down from them into your phone, and the phone would supply the computing power. It wasn't really enough computing power to power those glasses in a good way, but that was a trade-off that they would make, where nobody wants a cord hanging from their glasses, but you deal with it.
Right.
Apple has a cord running down from the Vision Pro into your pocket, and that's a battery. So you're carrying around extra life battery that keeps it going.
Yeah.
There are problems with how fast this technology can be reduced in cost or miniaturized. A lot of the tech is in the optics. And so you could have a 10-layer thick piece of glass that has different technologies in it that really make it a lot harder for it to be cost reduced, because normally you would say, oh, instead of 10 of these layers of optics, that would just want to use one, but they can't be condensed so easily the way, say, a semiconductor chip can be, when you're going from 3 chips in a system down to 1 or so, and you use the advantages of advanced miniaturization possible through semiconductor technology. That for decades let us go to more and more powerful lightweight experiences. And the stalling of Moore's law has even slowed that part of the advances down, right? And so now we don't get as fast a trajectory as we want. I do think there is one experience that is not not at all VR that is getting interesting though, and that is the Ray-Ban glasses, sunglasses from Meta.
Love those.
Right?
Yep.
And they can record video, and they can play music to you, and you can tap it and take pictures, and those pictures get stored on your phone or the video. So that's fine, but the cool thing they are adding is the conversational AI. And so then you can
point it at something and
ask a question and say, like, what is this thing here? And answer you. Eventually it'll be visually connected so that you can look at something and say, what am I looking at? And it'll tell you, oh, that's an ancient historical place that was built 500 years ago or something.
Yeah, and the answer will either be very accurate or confidently wrong, and you won't know the difference because LLMs are such a fun crapshoot.
It's just enough of a magical experience to work with ordinary sized glasses that maybe you'll start adopting it, and then eventually they'll make those lenses into something much more magical, like augmented reality.
Yeah. Did you have occasion to try Focals by North back in the day?
Which one?
Focals by North, the glasses with they were purchased by Google and I think just absorbed, but they released one product and it was exactly as you described. There were glasses, there was no wire, there was all self-contained. They were just a little chunky, but they looked pretty good. And they gave you a heads-up display through a kind of a laser projection system that was rather finicky, which was one of its downsides. But when it worked, you would get turn-by-turn directions and messages and a UI that you controlled through a little clever ring, actually. It was a really, really well-thought-out first-generation product, and I'm very sad that they got acquired and basically evaporated. But I look forward to the return of that, too, because I agree with you. I think that's one of the things that when I was trying, for example, the Meta Ray-Bans, I wanted a display component to make it a true augmented reality experience.
Yeah, and Mark Zuckerberg, he acknowledged in one of his earnings calls that wouldn't it be interesting if the killer application for the metaverse was less the visual things we're working on, which are in the lab still and maybe many years away before they can truly call it a metaverse, but maybe it's instead this audio delivered to you from AI that is really smart and tells you things that make you feel like you're in a bit of a metaverse.
Yeah.
Like, you're getting information from somewhere else about the place where you are. And it's all fully interactive or conversation.
I want to come back real quick to the large scale VR thing before we wrap it up, because there's something I have to ask you about, and there's an answer I really want you to give me, but I want you to be honest. I recently watched a video from Marques Brownlee. Wonderful first look at something called the Hollow Tile Infinite Floor from Disney. Did you see this video, or did you see one of Disney's videos?
I do remember seeing it. I seen it on video, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So what this is, for anybody who hasn't seen it, is essentially it solves the problem of the holodeck, which is that Star Trek creates this holodeck and you walk into a room and it's really beautiful because you can make it anything. But wouldn't you eventually walk into a wall? And with Holotile, you don't, because it's this floor and it's real. It's a real thing with spinning discs that are essentially omnidirectional treadmills. And when you are standing on it, you can walk in any direction and you will really not travel that far. Dean, this is the thing I want in my house more than anything else. Do you think that something like this could be commercializable within the next, say, decade? Do you think this will be a big component of VR going forward?
Yeah, I do think that is quite possible. I mean, it was more sophisticated in that video, I think, but there's something called the Omni treadmill already that exists, where you can actually, put on a VR headset. They have like a bit of a guardrail around you so you don't fall down. But then you go into this sort of, I don't know what the word for it is, but you're walking on a floor without moving, right? And it's got the sort of omnidirectional thing at the bottom of your feet that just moves, but doesn't actually move you, right? And so it does have the same kind of effect that the Disney thing is. And so you can actually run, you can be in a VR experience and run with this, with the VR headset over your eyes, and like you're in a shooting game, and you have to go actually run or otherwise, get yourself from one place to another and engage in much more physical play, much more physical combat when you're chasing after somebody.
That I would eat right up. Yeah, that sounds great to me. but I think I have seen it. So yeah, it's like a freestanding thing, and like you say, there's a railing around it. What appeals to me about the Holotile is of course that it replaces your floor basically, and I think there are some challenges to it where it's noisy or whatever. But I'm glad that you reminded me that there is a product out there that does the same thing differently. Can you buy that now, or is that experimental too?
Yeah. Definitely. I just Google at the price is $2,595 or $70 a month.
That's not as expensive as I would have expected.
Omni One goes into your home, but there are a lot of these Omni treadmills in place around different theme parks.
Got it.
Wherever you can find sort of VR in a theme park, usually these things are showing up.
Well, I have to get myself to a theme park then, because I'm starting to champ at the bit a little bit for some of these experiences I haven't had in a while. Last question.
And it does much more, get you much closer to fulfilling that sort of notion that you're exercising in VR and you're actually not just sitting in a chair like you are when you're a gamer.
Absolutely. Yeah, we talked on another episode recently about how the Nintendo Wii really changed fitness for a while there for people like of my parents' generation. And like, I would love to do that because I find exercise to be the dullest thing imaginable. And if I could play a game while exercising, I think it would change that. Last question here. VR has kind of gone through these cycles that seem to me to be very comparable to the hype cycles of 3D displays, where you get these peaks and valleys where some years it's like, it's all going to be 3D, it's all going to be VR, and then followed closely by everyone giving up on it and being like, nah, that was all buzz. With Meta and Sony, and now, of course, as we've talked about, Apple staking big claims in the space. Is VR, whether for gaming or otherwise, is it finally here to stay? Are we done with losing the hype after every?
Yeah, I do believe it's here to stay. It is a sizable chunk of the gaming industry for sure now. They've sold more than 33 million Meta Quest headsets by Meta so far, and those are at $500 or less now, and it's a pretty good experience. And I think more and more people, especially young people, will go into these and stay in them for hours at a time, socializing with each other. And they weren't really meant to be worn for hours,
right?
And yet people are doing this, and so that kind of behavior, tells me that the experience is delivering what people want, and it's different from what billions of other people are using in terms of smartphones go, right? I mean, there's always difficult things for VR to take on. Like as soon as you get something really good on graphics, people are going to go, okay, what about my hands? I can't feel anything in VR, right? And then so now you have to put on these gloves, and the gloves are or someone will shoot air at you and make you feel something that is happening in VR. Yeah. I don't know if you went into the Sphere yet in Las Vegas, but there's that point where you're watching a big immersive video and the wind is blowing in the experience, and then it blows right at you because they're blowing these fans at you.
Right. Yeah, one of the stranger parts of the Sphere experience for me, because I happen to be seated up very high and the air cannons are very low, so I felt like my 4D experience of the wind was delayed by like 10 seconds. It's like, maybe some work yet to be done there. But it's interesting you described that, the touch component, because you have to do gloves, and you have to do haptics for a vest, and eventually it really is a question of building the best layer of real physical inputs over your body so that you can experience as much of that virtual world as possible. It's strange and interesting. All I want is the floor still, but I will track the rest of it. Dean Takahashi, thanks for your time, for lending us your expertise and experience, and best of luck with the event coming up.
All right. See you in the metaverse.
Sounds good. Well, that's what they said yesterday. There's nothing left to do but pray. I think it's time I found a new religion. That's Jamiroquai again, taking us out on this one in words, if not in tunes, because I gotta believe it costs a pretty penny to license the actual song. Folks, it's been my privilege to talk tech with you for 10 episodes in this season of Living in the Future. I'd like to extend my thanks to you for your interest and for your indulgence on a few of my monologues that went on a little long in the early days. And also, I'd like to thank my guests. From the architects of our modern technological landscape to the reporters whose work helps us understand it, to MediaTek, who made the whole thing possible in the first place. These very busy and very bright folks have volunteered their faith and, that most precious of resources, their time to this show, and I very much appreciate it. If you have thoughts on the future landscape we currently inhabit, or the one just over the horizon, send them to me. I post often, usually about mobile gadgets, at Captain2Phones. That's Captain, the number 2 phones, on Threads and Instagram. Until next time, thanks once more to my sponsor, MediaTek, and thanks to you for listening. I've been Michael Fisher, and I'll see you in the future.